And I was able to come into the commentary box for this race yesterday, or the race yesterday, apologies, with the National Training Centre from Australia. The Australian Women's 8 against Yale University from the United States of America. Yale placed 9th in the final of the NCAAs this year, and they've almost brought the full varsity lineup with only one change. And they were runners-up at the Ivy League Championships.
When I see you are both straight and ready, I will start you like this. Attention, go. Get ready, please.
So we see the coxswain from Australia, James Rook, putting his hand up just to indicate to the umpire that he's aligning his boat. Once his hand goes down, the umpire will be able to start the race.
Really looking forward to this race. Let's see what happens.
Attention, as you were.
It's swirly down on the start line there. Deceptive, it looks very calm from here, but there is a little bit of breeze around. It does push the boat around on the start.
Attention, go!
I think the Yale crew got a little bit of a jump on the Australians there, so I don't want to say they were slow off the start, but they seem to be a little bit delayed, and that can be a critical early advantage as Yale start to ram down the power and push through the legs. They've been a really tight unit together, the Yale crew. By contrast, the Australian crew's only just come together.
That's right. It was I call it a patient start from the Australians. They just look like they squeezed the boat up.
That's your word for it,
They took their time in the first few. I know Matt's looking at me very sceptically here, but I think that they did those first few strokes well, whereas the Yale crew, huge amount of strength and power on board, really driving that boat out of the blocks. But the Aussie crew just about a canvas up now in these early stages. Of course, in this crew, we do have the World Championship winning women's four, or 3 members of that 4 members, in fact, Katrina Werry, but we have the full crew as well. Katrina Werry out of that 4, and Rosie Popper going in at the World Cup in Linz, where they won a couple of weeks ago. So the top 4 women in this crew, it is one of the strongest crews that Australia can boat. They're here for one thing, and that's to take home the trophy.
Yeah, I think it's great to see. It looks like, you're right, Sarah, patience has paid off a little bit. They've got a little bit more, maybe than 1-2 seats on the Yale crew. This is the World Championship 4, and the 8, as you say, from Australia come together to try and win Henley. And this shows you that's how important it is on the bucket list of any rower to come here and have this experience.
That's right. We had a Rowing Australia function on Tuesday at Australia House in London, and we heard from John Keogh, the head coach of the Australian women's team, and Ian Wright, the head coach of the Australian men's team. Of course, Australia going to a centralised model after the Rio Olympic Games, with the women being centralised at the Georgina Hope Training Centre up in Penrith, near Sydney, and the men down at the Rinehart Training Centre in Canberra. And we heard Ian Wright. He was the one who said this is a bucket list event, and they came here to enjoy it, to have a good time. But we don't mean that in terms of having a party or anything like that. They mean enjoy it by winning the event and taking home the prize. Winning
Henley is a good time, and you can see that by the number of crews who come back here 30 years on or more to row over the course in celebration of what they did together. It forms incredibly strong bonds. As we look here at the Yale crew, also excited to come here. They've got a lot of experience because they do a lot of dual racing, one-on-one racing in the US, so they're excited to be here and having the chance to race against the Australian national team. But it's a tall order, isn't it, even for a really top US university crew to be able to take on a national squad crew like the Australians. And the reigning Cox's 4 champions there in the boat. If you want to row in a boat with good rowers, the Cox's 4 is not a bad boat to have in your 8.
That's right, and it is the priority boat for Australia, we know, so it is the strongest 4 athletes going into that crew. But this Yale crew, they're young, 20 to 22 years of age. I saw before the umpire launches went out, saw the Yale coach talking to the coaches from Australia and to the CEO of Rowing Australia, so Will Porter, the head coach there at Yale, an Olympic rower himself for the United States. So he would have known what a ask it was to go up against the Australian Women's 8 here. We saw them come out very aggressively, and like with some of the other 8s races, when you know that you're probably not the favourite, it's really your only option is to get yourself into the race, give yourself a fighting chance to hang in there. But I think we would have expected this race to unfold as it is.
So Sarah, let me ask you, what do you read into the contrasting styles here? We've got the chance to compare the style of the Australian crew nearest us. Obviously their heads are a bit more relaxed against the US rowing style of the Yale crew. How would you contrast that approach?
Look, Australians, I think, are quite well known for how we tend to row. We do tend to be, I guess, we would call it more technically proficient, but that sounds really rude. That's not how I mean it, but we definitely are more sympathetic, I think, to the boat and ensuring that we're rowing technically well, whereas typically the Americans rely on their power. They're very strong athletes. We know that when we used to race against the Women's 8, or when I used to race against the Women's 8, they were so strong, so powerful, and that was so hard to come up against. We don't have that kind of power on board. We certainly don't have the numbers to select from, so our only real alternative is to try and row as well as we can, and I think Australian rowing is recognised that way.
Yeah, so I mean, without blowing smoke, Sarah, the Australian stereotype would be a bit more technical, a bit more loose, and the American would be a bit more about power. And I think you can see that when you look at the Yale crew from behind here, looking in the face of Daisy Mathieu-Manson in the stroke seat, 20 years old, a winner of the Canadian Henley. No stranger to this battle paddling, this dual style of rowing, and it is a duel, but it's hard when you're up against one of the world's best teams. The reigning world champion in the Coxless 4 is quite a tall order. Put them together with the other best athletes in the squad, and this is a great row from the Australians, if I can say so.
Yeah, they're looking really strong. Looks in the bow seat like Lucy Steffen there from the Women's 4. Really well connected. I mean, this isn't the Australian 8, but they're rowing really well together. I think that shows the strength of the training centre, and having all of the women in one place, and the men for that matter, training together means that you can have the same styles, the same coaching, the same messages going out to all of the athletes. We've got 3 great coaches there, Ellen Randall, Tom Westgarth, John Keogh, looking after these women as a squad and sharing that coaching amongst themselves. John Keogh over here, while Tom and Ellen are over in Varese with the rest of the team as they prepare for World Cup 3. So I know that the Australian rowing team will be watching this from there and cheering on the Aussie girls here as they're coming down towards the enclosures to make it through this semi-final. But all eyes certainly over there at the European Training Centre in Varese will be on the men's and the women's 8s, as well as Maddie Edmonds and hopefully the men's pair if they get through the 4 Australian national team crews who are here racing.
Yeah, so a great display of 8s rowing by the Australians, and we should give full credit to the younger Yale University crew, excited to be here, having the chance to race a crew of this class on the Henley track. Amazing atmosphere, see the huge number of spectators really close to the course, applauding fantastic rowing from these 2 top women's 8s.
And of course James Rook, the coxswain there. So interestingly, in the Australian 8s, a male coxswain in the female crew, and a female coxswain, Kendall Brody, in the men's crew. So following that visa change, allowing for coxswains of either gender to cox internationally, we have that happening in the Australian crews this year.
Yeah, it's great to see that, mixing it up in that way, and a lovely victory for the Australian National Training Centre crew over Yale University, USA.
So a strong row there from the Australian Women's 8 in the Remenham, defeating the younger crew from Yale University. Look, I think they did a really great job. We weren't talking about the Australians the whole time. I think the Yale crew, they did race well, and making it to the Saturday is no mean feat.
Yeah, and you can see that's been an expensive effort as we look back over this race, getting onto the stake boats at the start, and then off they go. Huge power, strong style from the American women. Got a little bit of a lead early on, but it wasn't to be. Within a minute or so, the Australians pushed out and they pushed further, and then they displayed the technique that's allowed them the success they've had on the international stage.